Okay, let's just give a minute for people to pop in. All right, so hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for the Hudson Valley YA Society Pride Panel. I'm Fred from Oblong Books in Millerton, New York. I'm a bookseller there, and I'm really excited to be here. This is my first time moderating a panel, and I'm just so glad it's this one because queer YA books are so much about connection and self-exploration, and those are really important things to me and have been big themes in my life. So it's just so great to be here. Before we do introductions, I have a few instructions for anybody in the audience who hasn't attended one of our virtual events before. First of all, if you have any questions during the discussion portion of the program, you can type them into the chat or into the Q&A module at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them after the discussion portion of tonight's panel. So we have 5 amazing YA authors joining us to talk about their new books and celebrate Pride with us. Wave and hold up your book when I call your name. Let's start with Ashley Woodfolk with Nothing Burns as Bright as You. There she is. Tucker Shaw with When You Call My Name. Rachel Lippincott and Allison Derrick with She Gets the Girl. Love that cover. And Andrew Joseph White with Hell Followed Books.
I forgot my book in the other room. The cover on my phone will have to do.
I love that you have that as your background. Okay, so copies of all these books are available online through oblongbooks.com, and I'll post the link for you in the chat in a little bit. And trust me, you want to get these books because I read them all. They're all so good in very different ways, but it was a very good reading month for me. All right, so welcome to the authors. It's so great to have you here, and thank you for joining us. To start off, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your book. Let's start with Ashley with Nothing Burns as Bright as You.
Hi guys, thanks for being here. My name is Ashley Woodfolk, and this is my latest novel. It's called Nothing Burns as Bright as You. It is actually the first novel I've ever written in verse. And it is the story of 2 queer Black teen girls who are best friends, and their relationship sort of spirals into something that's a little bit more than friends. It's about first love. It's about mistakes, making them and figuring out what to do after you make them. And it's also just about relationship toxicity, because I feel like that's something we don't really talk about enough. And I guess like the takeaway that I want people to get from this book is that even if you're toxic with one person, that doesn't mean that you are a toxic human, either of you. And that, you know, everyone is lovable. That was kind of what I wanted to come out of this novel. But yeah, it takes place over the course of a single day. But then there are flashbacks, so you get a little background on the girls' relationship to each other, and also their families and things like that. So that is Nothing Burns as Bright as You.
That's great, and it is such a beautiful book. Let's move on to Tucker with When You Call My Name.
So I'm Tucker Shaw, and this is When You Call My Name. And this is a book set in New York City in 1990, and it deals with a couple of young, teenage guys kind of coming up and coming out at the height of AIDS, sort of that early portion of the AIDS crisis in the 80s and 90s. It draws a lot. It's not autobiographical, but it draws a lot on my own experience during those days. And my hope for it was to just kind of broaden an understanding of not necessarily the facts and figures and all the sort of hard historical data about that period of time in queer history, but to really get to some of the feelings and the emotions that that I and many others in my generation experienced at that time. It represents only a very tiny sliver of the experience of HIV/AIDS, which is not over, which is still a major global issue. But I wanted to show that, like, when we talk about that period of time, we don't always have to talk about the darkness and the pain and the sorrow, even though it was saturating during those years. There was also a lot of beauty, and there was a lot of humor, and the creativity of the queer community really, I don't know, really just shone during that period in sort of unexpected ways. And I want to make sure that I'm doing my part to kind of preserve a little bit about what that time felt like for anyone who wants to know more.
Yeah, one of the things I really loved about your book was the sense of community and caring for each other, that coming together, that I feel like sometimes we're lacking these days. And I think that's something more that we can bring back and really strengthen.
Work stronger together.
Yes, that's absolutely the message. All right, let's do Rachel and Allison with She Gets the Girl.
I'm Allison. I co-wrote She Gets the Girl. It's my debut, and go ahead.
Take it away. So yeah, She Gets the Girl. It's just a sapphic rom-com set at the University of Pittsburgh. It follows two polar opposite girls, Alex and Molly, and they, end up colliding and kind of coming up with the plan to help one another get the respective girls of their dreams. And classic rom-com style, they end up falling in love with one another instead. So we just really wanted to write, a really fun lesbian rom-com. Everybody's out, everybody's having fun, everybody's falling in love and being chaotic. And also just, at the same time, there's like kind of a discussion on their relationships with their mothers and, just kind of growing and changing too. I don't know if you have anything else to.
Yeah, that's good.
Cool.
Yeah, I loved that in your book. When you started, it seems like Molly is the one who really needs to kind of get it together and grow up and go through everything. But as you read it, you learn that Alex really has just as much growing to do, and she does, and it's a really beautiful thing to experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and finally, last but not least, Andrew with Hell Followed With Us.
Hello, yes, I'm Andrew, author of Hell Followed With Us, which, as I discovered 5 minutes ago, hit the NYT bestseller list. So Hell Followed With Us is a really nasty, like bloodthirsty, angry YA about a gay trans boy after the end of the world. Who there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a post-apocalyptic fundamentalist fascist doomsday cult. There's a virus that turns people into giant monsters. And there is a youth LGBTQ plus center that survived the end of the world and has become a hub for the survivors that stayed there when the world ended. And it's largely about trans anger in reaction to a lot of the stuff that's been going on recently, talking a lot about what fascism and fundamentalism looks like in America, especially in like white spaces, and how scary that can be for the rest of the world. And also just it's fun. It's just fun to be gross and angry and cathartic and get away with doing stuff that would get you put in jail in real life. So yeah, I personally think it's a lot of fun, but it's a lot. So that's Hell Followed With Us.
Yes, I would definitely agree that it's a lot, but in like the best way. I'm a big horror lover, so this was on my list for a while, and um, I just love that you pulled no punches from like page one, the moment where he's talking about like his father dies and his blood gets all over his face, and it's just like from right then I could tell this was a book for me. So let's move on to our questions. The first one I have for you is that even though these books are all so diverse, one theme in all of them is that your characters are making all these connections, and some of those are romantic, some of them are not, some of them are very harmful or toxic, some of them are positive, and others are really complicated. So those connections help shape and teach your characters who they are and the things that are really core to them. What did those connections, how did those connections shape the story that you were telling? And if anyone wants to go first, just let me know. Otherwise, I can pick on someone. All right, let's go with Tucker first.
It's a great question. I think that understanding, especially for queer kids growing up, and queer adults, frankly, understanding the power of friendship, and how essential it is into understanding yourself through the lens of your relationships, and how essential it is, especially, oftentimes I think, well, almost always when you grow up in a family, in a sort of straight family, and you're a queer kid, you are different. You're different from the people in your family. And so you don't always have a soft place to land at home. And so finding relationships, finding friendships, finding your people. And I think sometimes we often talk about finding a family, but really you have to build a family. You have to work to create a family, and you have to put in the work to maintain the family. And understanding that as a queer person, at a time in my book, which happened in 1990, at a time when really it felt like, honestly, this is not hyperbole, it felt like it was the end of us, because there was no real treat. I mean, I think that the mortality rate at that time for HIV was over 90%. So really not many people were finding a way through at all. And so it felt hopeless. But to be able to find a family, find your friends, and be able to speak with them in shorthand, to not have to come out constantly over and over again with the people closest to you. It's a way to understand yourself and to understand your value. And that's kind of what I hope to show in the book.
That's great. How about, let's go with Andrew next. How did those connections in your book shape where you were going with the story?
Yeah, so like one of the most like important things of Hell Followed With Us is the Atchison LGBTQ plus center, where the main character like finds himself in like chapter 4 and stays for the rest of it, because the character himself was raised in a right-wing fascist fundamentalist doomsday cult. The fact that he was trans was probably one of the most, like, he had to hide that constantly. And he'd never met another trans person before. He didn't know what was going on. And he walks into that LGBTQ plus center and meets 2 trans people immediately. Right. And so like him getting to meet all of these other people who have like the same experience, but also so many diverse experiences in that vein, is like what teaches him to be like, I know that I only have like a few weeks left in this body because it is rotting due to the virus, but the time that I have with it is precious, and that experience will continue even when I am no longer human. So him like getting to meet like this group of queer kids who are not only surviving the apocalypse, but fighting back against this oppressive force, was so important for him to actually like get to see people like him existing and surviving in a world where people are actively trying to eradicate them. So I knew going into it that I wanted this to be a found family story. And I was like, I need almost every single character in this book to be queer. And I did it. I mean, everyone except for the bad guys is queer, which is telling. But like, I went into this story being like, this has to be about community. Especially in like a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction, it's, you know, survival of the fittest, every man for themselves. And I was like, no, we're not going to do that here. Not in my good queer household.
I love that. Yeah, just the coming together of queer people is just such a powerful thing. And I just can't get enough of it in fiction and in real life. Okay, how about Ashley? Your connections between your characters are a little more complicated. So that was a big part of the story you were telling. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so just to give you guys like a little bit of background about when I wrote this book, I wrote it in the summer of 2020. So things were going down. And I think I was just having, all I was really doing at the time was like going to virtual therapy and taking care of my kid, because I had no childcare all of a sudden. And I think being physically and emotionally sort of stuck made me kind of reckon with a lot of things that I had been ignoring or dismissing or just like sort of brushing under the rug and not looking too closely at. And because of that, I started sort of thinking a lot about a lot of my own past relationships and past friendships, and especially the people who I had called friends who were definitely more than that. And then how that, I guess, affected the way that I thought about my identity. And so I knew when I was writing this book that I wanted to tell a story where the girls weren't necessarily labeling anything. And also like the complications that come along with refusing to label anything. Not only their own sexuality, but also the relationship that they have with each other. And so that was their relationship. I mean, I always say, like, I don't really write books that have a lot of plot. Like, not a lot happens in any of my books. Like, they set a fire, they skip school, and they kind of just like run around town all day. And that's kind of what the book is about. But if you want to talk like plot wise, but this book is actually about the emotions that go into falling in love with someone and not necessarily wanting to define it or wanting to look too closely at it, or wanting to not necessarily do anything about it, but feeling like that person is essential to like your being, but not knowing how to express that. And so this book is purely about emotions. It is purely about the relationship that these girls have to each other and their fear about defining that relationship. I don't think it even necessarily is specifically about their identity. It's much more about like, this person is everything to me. What would happen if I didn't have them anymore? And that is the story that I wanted to tell. So the relationship literally is the story. I couldn't have written a book about, sort of voracious first love without having girls who were kind of afraid of love. And that was very much my experience when I was younger too. And I had several of these kinds of really intense friendships, situationships, as they call them, as the kids these days call them. But yeah, so yeah, my connections were really essential to telling the story.
Yeah, and the intensity of the connection between the two girls rung so true to me for teenagehood, because
It's messy.
Yeah, it's messy, and
Everybody is a
when
hot
you're-
mess.
when you're a teenager, you don't do anything by halves. So I love that. And let's move on to Allison and Rachel.
So I think for my character Molly, there's like two important relationships in the book. The first being with her mom, who is a transracial adoptee from Korea. And unfortunately, the way she grew up kind of manifested really strong feelings of internalized racism. And Molly has been really trying her whole life not to inherit that. And that sort of really comes to a head toward the end of the book. And it's something I think she's wanted to talk to her mom about probably her whole life. And, now finally she's like finding the words and the courage to do that. And then there's Molly's relationship with Rachel's character, Alex. And I think Molly is someone who has sort of like been searching for validation, like external validation from people through high school, instead of like, finding who she is as an individual. And her life has almost been kind of like stuck, like waiting for this. And then, Alex comes along, and it isn't that Alex validates her, because honestly, like she's the last person, Alex is the last person Molly would ever want validating her. But I think she kind of is the first person to help her believe that like she doesn't need validated. She's like fine just the way she is. And yeah, I think that's what really gives her the courage to like really have that conversation with her mom.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think for Alex, like I can think of two major connections in this story that kind of shape her trajectory. And that would be Molly, of course, first and foremost, and also Jim, the food truck owner, that they have a really great relationship. And these are two people that Alex really interacts with people on a really surface level way. She doesn't have a lot of deep connections. She doesn't open herself up a lot. These are two people that really make her feel seen. They really make her feel safe, and they really make her feel like she can express herself and kind of express and talk about her mother, who is this her mother suffered, she's an alcoholic, she suffers from alcoholism. And it's this really complicated and toxic relationship for Alex. And, through Jim and through Molly, she's able to kind of share that with somebody and kind of share a bit of the burden of that with somebody. So I think that's really special. And I think something really important for her is through that, she's able to kind of find her voice and find the strength to confront her mom and really say, how difficult it has been for her, and kind of put her foot down and kind of move on. And, I think those two connections, both with Molly and, a food truck owner that's there for her in really special ways, really helps her grow as a person and really helps her, open up in a way that she hasn't in years, ever, maybe.
Yeah, I think something that's really special about this book is that both characters have this trajectory towards growing more and more able to have those conversations and set those boundaries. And boundaries are such an important thing for teenagers to learn, especially with your parents. And frankly, that is something I am still learning myself. So seeing the relationship between the girls' mothers, just improving towards the end of the book and healing was really special. Okay. So does anybody have anything more to say on that, or should we move on to our next question? Okay. So right now, as we all are aware, there's been a really massive pushback against queer and trans rights, especially for younger people. Can you tell me a bit about what made you decide to write for this younger queer audience instead of maybe writing an adult book, or, writing something maybe a little safer that would be received in a different way? Tucker.
Yeah, I mean, I actually started working on this book maybe 4 years ago, so it was a bit of a slog. But I really wanted to talk about this period of time in queer history in a way that I hoped would feel current in a sense, even though it is historical fiction, which actually drives a stake through my heart because it feels like yesterday to me. But it was 30 years ago, 30 something years ago. I remember it so perfectly well. But my goal wasn't necessarily to educate young people necessarily about that period of time, but I wanted to kind of offer some kind of proof of our capacity to face challenges and to come together and try to foment change, and to also make clear that like activism and gunning for change, it never ends. You have to keep going to the next mountain. Every peak you clear, there's another one. It's like climbing, the Himalayas, and you're just sort of like, really? I just came all the way up here and now there's another one. But they will continue to come. They will always come. We can't always predict what they will be. But if we believe in ourselves, I think it sounds corny, but like, if you don't believe in yourself, you're helpless. But if you do believe in yourself, then there is a possibility that you can come through with something that feels like humanity. And I don't think that you have to look very far back in history to see evidence of that in the queer community. And that's kind of why I wanted to show, because the idea of hopelessness, especially among young people, is just so heartbreaking. And I identify with it. I know what that feels like. And to be able to just kind of combat that a little bit through fiction. And hopefully it finds a few readers and maybe changes a mind or two. And I also want the stray kids to see it too, by the way. I want them to see who we are and understand that we're freaking cool.
And your characters are, by the way, very cool. They are good at what they do. And Ben especially is very into the fashion industry, and I was very impressed by him. But I think that as you were talking about all the hills we have to climb and how it never ends, I think that your book really spoke to the rejuvenation you find in those found families, the built families, as you put it. And I think that's something that we need to remember, because social media found family isn't quite the same as in person. And, in your book, social media just isn't a thing yet. And so instead, it's this interlacing community of queer people who are supporting each other, going to the hospital, bringing each other food, and having parties for each other when they find out bad news. And I think that's something that we could use more of, for sure. Ashley, can you tell me a bit about what made you decide to write for this younger audience?
I can't say that it was a decision, really. This was a very, I think, unique writing experience for me. I doubt I will ever write a book in this way again, but it was like almost like those montages you see in movies of like writers like going crazy at the keyboard and like, finishing a book like super quickly. Like that has literally never happened to me before. But this is the first time that had ever happened. And I think it was just because it was something, the story, maybe not this story specifically, but this kind of story had been living inside of me, I think, for so long that it just like spilled out. And I like feel so cliche even saying that, because I know how hard it is to write a book. But this writing experience was so different from any other book that I've written before or since. And I didn't necessarily decide to write it. I was writing some poetry to kind of process some feelings, and I just like kept going. And you know, I don't know, 20 pages in, and I'm like, wait a minute, maybe this is more than just me, you know, doing a feelings dump from therapy. Like maybe there is something else that's actually here. And then when I sort of saw that a story could sort of flow through all the feelings that I was having, I was thinking much more about the younger version of me, or the kids who are out there now sort of experiencing these kinds of dilemmas or these kinds of relationships and not really knowing where to go or what to do. I was thinking much more about that, and not like I always say, like, I care about the kids. Like, I don't care about all the stupid adults who like have a problem with random stuff, because like at the end of the day, if there is one kid who reads this book and feels better or feels like seen, then that is what I care about. I don't care if it gets banned from, I mean, I do care. I don't want it to get banned, obviously. But like if it got banned from every library, but there was still a kid who found it somehow, like that is what my goal is. That is what is important to me. And so, you know, writing it was not a decision, but once I realized what was happening, focusing more on like the people who I thought might need a story like this one versus everyone else, that part was a decision. And so I just tried to keep like, you know, 15-year-old me front of mind, in addition to, you know, the millions of 15-year-olds out there who might be kind of like me, and might get something out of the story. So that was much more of what it was for me.
I absolutely think a lot of kids will get something out of your story, because these are really unique characters that aren't always written about. You know, not only are they Black and queer, but they're troublemakers, and they're not, you know, just going along trying to make straight A's. They're very intelligent, but they're using that intelligence in ways that are not necessarily approved of by the people around them. Okay, so let's have Allison and Rachel go next.
I feel like I kind of like the younger audience and the queer audience kind of came like separately. I think as far as like writing for a younger audience, when I got into writing, I was pretty young. I think I was like 20, 21. So I think I just sort of fell into the YA genre naturally because, you know, I didn't really have much adult experience. And I think I write queer stories because I am queer. And I don't have much of a desire to write anything else. And I think if I tried to write like, you know, maybe like a straight love story, it just wouldn't have the authenticity that I think like She Gets the Girl ended up with. And I think that'll always be like most important to me, like making sure things feel really like real and authentic.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think I initially and kind of got into writing for a younger audience just because, similar to Allison, it also just being close in age, but also it just felt like such an exciting time, like thinking about like high school, like, you know, your first love, your first, so many firsts, like you're going off to college, you're on your own for the first time. And I feel like that was just like a really special point. But I think the reason I started writing, you know, books like She Gets the Girl, The Lucky List, it's because like, you know, I just think about like going to Barnes and Noble when I was, you know, 14, and all I could find was like Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, and it's like a historical crime drama. And I just remember like reading that all the time, and that was like it. There was like a handful of books, you know, that you could find, and none of them were, you know, swoony rom-coms about not, or at least not very many of them were like swoony rom-coms about just, you know, two lesbians out like living their lives and doing their thing. And I feel like that's really why I love writing this genre. We had like a TikTok comment like a couple of weeks ago that was just somebody saying like, your book made me feel comfortable in my skin. And that's like, it doesn't get better than that. That's like why I write these books. This is why I do this. And just have a single person say that and feel that when, I think back to me roaming the bookstore, reading the same book over and over again and having a similar experience, so yeah, just that, to have somebody share that for sure.
Yeah, that's like a really transformative thing, I think, and a formative thing for younger people, like the representation they see. I remember myself, like, even though there was some queer media out there, for me, my identity didn't really coalesce in my brain until I met people like me. And fiction is kind of a safe way to do that. It's, you get into people's heads and that helps you explore your identity. And I think that's really important for this audience in particular.
That was me with The Color Purple. It was like literally the only book I knew of that had like Black girls kissing. And I was like, wait, what is happening? Why do I love this book so much?
No, definitely.
Okay, Andrew, you're up.
Yeah, so you mentioned, like, why didn't we write anything safer? My guiding principle is that I refuse to write anything that's safe for straight people. If it makes them comfortable, I did it wrong. But I started writing Hell Followed With Us, like, I think like a week after I turned 20. And I am about to turn 24 now. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm a baby, right? I actually didn't read a book with a trans main character until like Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas came out. And that was not very long ago. And I had figured out that I was a trans guy around that point, but I had to piece it together from like disparate little conversations that I had with, friends and on Tumblr and all that sort of stuff. And all that I could think was that if I had had a book about a trans boy earlier, maybe it would have been easier for me. And looking back, some of them did exist. And I realized I didn't want to read them because they were all contemporary. And I only read horror and sci-fi as a kid. In high school, I found a list of the 100 most disturbing books in the English language, and I was reading them one by one, right? And if there wasn't a trans guy in that, I never would have found it, So when I started, writing Hell Followed With Us, and I was like, I'm gonna actually try and publish this book. I was like, all right, so what would I have wanted to read at 16? And I was like, all right, so we're going to need a trans boy and we need to make it as gross as we can get away with. I'm surprised that so much of that got past my editor every day. I feel like I pulled a fast one, like, honestly. But so much of it was just me going, this would have helped me so much as a kid if I had had it. And I needed to make it like accessible to someone like me who kind of like flinched away if things were too real. If things like, I had like a lot of issues with my gender dysphoria that made me feel more monster than a person. And then the autism on top of that, which made me even more disconnected from people. So I was like, contemporary stories are too scary because they're too real, but they also do not mimic how violent the inside of my head is. Right. So I don't know if there was a contemporary splatterpunk, maybe I would have read it. So I was like, it has to be about monsters. It has to be horror. It has to remind me of what it was like to play The Last of Us or Dead Space for the first time. I have to, this has to be gross. And I did. I wrote it, and I'm honestly really glad that I did, because like the amount of people who have been like, hey, this book, this is the anger that I should have let myself have as a kid. Because a lot of people apparently were very angry children and had nowhere to deal with that. And all of that is actually the same for like the autistic rep in the book too. Like, I didn't know when I was 16. I didn't know until I was doing research for the autistic character and went, oh, maybe I should talk to somebody about that. And like looking back, it's like, yeah, I was not only angry because I was trans and queer and didn't know it, but I was autistic and being alienated 24/7. And I'm angry about that too. So a lot of this was just channeling anger that I needed to have as a kid. And I'm really glad that it's helping people now.
Yeah, that's great. I think that this goes back to what Tucker was saying about the constant struggle. It's once you reach a summit, there's always more. And I think that what you all are doing is putting in the work to continue that fight for ourselves, the people around us, but also for the next generation. And it's so important. That's why I'm so glad to be here. I think we've got time for one more. So since this is a Pride panel, I do want to talk about where Pride comes from. For me, Pride comes a lot from the connections we talked about and the self-exploration and doing those things despite the pushback, the hate, the organized attacks that have been more and more coming. And I think being queer, you really learn to know yourself in a way that maybe sometimes cis and het people don't. And that's a big part of that for me. So what I want to know is, where does Pride come from for you? And maybe what's your favorite part of being queer? Let's see, Ashley.
Hi. So this was a really interesting question to me. And I think that existing in a world, in a body, and with an identity that is so often vilified and demonized and dehumanized, I think that you have to love yourself. You have to feel prideful. You have to be just like so all about you, because the rest of the world is sort of always trying to tell you that you ain't shit. But it's like, no, I am the shit, actually. And I have that twofold, right? As a Black woman and as a queer woman. I feel like it comes at me from every angle, even if it's not directly at me, it's always happening. Somebody always has something to say. Someone always has an opinion. Someone always has something, there's laws being passed against like not only my body, but like, just like, I don't know, it's endless. And I think that oppression is sort of like water to make pride grow in a way, because it's like, why can't you see how wonderful I am? And when other people can't see it, it just forces you to show them in a way that is undeniable. So I think that's what it means to me.
And that's the poet in you coming out. That's really beautiful. Oppression being the water for pride to grow. I love that. Tucker, what does pride mean to you?
I mean, I'm not even sure exactly how to answer that question. For me, pride, I don't know. I think when I was growing up, when you were talking about books and other things that were available to you when you were growing up, I think when I was growing up, it was Frog and Toad. That was it. And you had to really read between the lines to and it didn't dawn on me until years later that was like, oh, and Ernie and Bert, things like that, where you saw what they're fake, they're not people, and I don't know, Ernie and Bert are puppets, and these guys are frogs and toads, but like they felt like people. And I think for me, pride is about a little bit of, it's similar to what Ashley was saying about the world is constantly coming at you for one reason or another because of what you aren't. or how you're not good enough or whatever. And if you can take a minute or a month or every day and say, look, but this is what I am. Here's who I am. And I'm here. And like, that's something. And so that's really something worth celebrating. And I see me and I see you, and I challenge you to see me, but if you don't, whatever, ciao. But I'm gonna like have a good time here, you know, and celebrate myself. And so Pride as a month or a celebration or just a way of being, it's partly a survival tactic, but also it's a conduit to being joyful.
Yeah, and it's absolutely very much screw you to the people who want you to be ashamed. And I think that's just as important as any other interpretation. Allison and Rachel.
I think for me, pride comes from just like all the years I spent growing up in like middle school and high school. I grew up in like a very small town in a very Catholic family. And just like watching all my friends develop crushes on like boys and fall in love and just like truly believing that like there was something wrong with me, that like I could not understand how, you know, they were feeling this way toward these people. And then finally like getting out of that and like coming to Pittsburgh and you know, realizing that like, you know, I can be attracted to girls and like that's fine. And I just like never really saw it as an option. I think I was like just so closeted that it just didn't seem like an option. And yeah, so I think my pride comes from like, I think once I realized like I was gay, I definitely felt like, you know, really proud to be like a lesbian.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think pride for me, it really just comes from, you know, living my life, being true to myself and existing exactly as I am. You know, it's being married to Alyson, it's writing books together, it's, you know, having our baby together in August, like stuff like that. And just like having that and just doing my thing, you know, I mean, there's no other way to put it. I think that's like, that's just what pride is to me. You know, you sometimes you like receive comments on a TikTok and, you know, those comments don't matter to you because you know exactly who you are and you're so rooted in that and secure in that and happy and proud and all of those things that just, it's like dissonant noise. It doesn't even matter. It's just, you know, living your life and just being yourself. I mean, it's as simple as that for me.
Yeah, I think that's a gift that being queer gives us, as we struggle through all these things about our identity. And at first, maybe we think that there's something wrong with us, but eventually we come to realize that who I am is okay. And that seems like a simple thing, but it's something that many people struggle with for their entire lives. And getting through to the other side of that makes you not just a stronger person, but a happier person. All right, Andrew, let's tie it up with you.
Yeah. I love that my initial response to like what is pride is bring a brick because the ones laid out are bait. But like a lot of it for me was kind of the realization that like you don't have to be a monster if you don't want to be, right? Because, you know, like as I talked about, you know, like the gender dysphoria warped into something really nasty, and like unrecognized autism, I always felt like more connected to monsters than people. And it's a huge difference between feeling like you have no choice to be a monster and getting to pick that, right? And pride was the moment where I was like, oh, I'm not a monster because people say that I am. I am because I want to use teeth and claws to protect the kids coming after me. you know? Because like I've kind of like made my brand around spite and anger at the world that has done this to us. And it's like being a monster can be like a form of protection, right? You can use like this nasty part of you to protect the more vulnerable parts of the people that you're close to. And it was definitely that moment where I realized that I got to pick it, you know, and if people were going to see me this way, fine, I'll play into it. I'll be, you know, I'll be what I want to be. And if you think that this is monstrous, you know what, fine. Just don't be surprised when we bite, you know. And it was also just a lot of community, because I have a hard time with people, you know, a lot of people like don't like make sense to me, and I can struggle to communicate sometimes. So having this community where there are parts of me that I don't have to explain because people already know. You know, when I say that, you know, when I say that I'm a trans guy, people like, they get it. When I say that I'm not he, him as in he, him, I'm he, him as in it's, people get it, right? And I don't have to explain that. And it's just so nice to have like a common language for once for with anybody. So just the people that I've chosen to surround myself with, you know, my girlfriend, fiance now, and all of the people that, you know, I've come to love over with my friends, and this the kind of the small family that I've built for myself. It's getting to have that and getting to pick who you are and not having it be dictated by somebody else, which I couldn't ask for more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this kind of mainstream narrative of queerness and gayness and whatever is not a choice. It's just inherent. But I feel like it's so much more than that. I think when you are queer, there's so many ways you can express that. There's so many ways you can integrate that into yourself. And it really helps you decide what kind of person you want to be. All right, that was great. We do have a couple of Q&A questions, so let me pull those up. All right, this question is for everyone. What was your favorite moment to write in your book? So did you have a favorite scene or a favorite quote, anything like that?
I have one.
Great.
There's a scene about halfway through the novel where the girls have just had a fight with each other. They have this big fight in the parking lot of this movie theater, and then they decide to go to the beach. And on the way to the beach, it's like really quiet and like they're sort of mad at each other. But then one of the girls is like a little bit more, I guess, like wild than the other one who's a little more reserved. They're both like chaotic as hell, but like the one that is a little bit more wild, which would be the one with the big fro on the cover, she climbs, they're driving the other one's brother's pickup truck, and she climbs out into the bed of the truck and tells, you know, the other girl, they don't have names, that's why I'm saying like the girl and the other girl, she tells her to like turn up the radio really loud or whatever, and she blasts this song that they both love. It's giving Perks of Being a Wallflower tunnel scene, you know what I mean? And the line that I really love is, and this is the way we apologize, me with music, her with madness. And I just really love that scene. And I also love the scene when they actually get to the beach. But that whole chapter is probably my favorite chapter in the book. They like get to the beach, they smoke up, and they sort of just like bond in this moment where they had been so separated, and they sort of come back together. And I always love makeup scenes, and so that was my favorite scene to write.
Yeah, that was a great scene. They do a lot of breaking up and coming back together throughout the book, and that scene, especially when they're getting high, is just like very formative for them, and I think it's a really good one. Tucker, or I see Allison muted. That's go ahead.
Allison is eager. I don't know what she's gonna say.
No, I just thought it'd be easier. I think my favorite scene to write was, it'd be the second to last chapter, which was my last chapter because Rachel wrote the last chapter. And you know, the whole book, Molly is like after this girl Cora, and like you just know it's not right, and like you're just waiting for like, you know, everything to break and her to realize you know, that it's really Alex that she likes. And yeah, I feel like the payoff of that moment of her like finally realizing like, oh, like this is not what love is like, and then the build of her like sort of leaving Cora behind to like go find Alex. I just remember listening to Build a Home like a million times while yeah, it's like the most cinematic song. And yeah, I just had like the best time writing that scene.
Definitely. Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, it's actually pretty funny, but I felt like all of the favorite scenes in the book that I was thinking of were all like Molly chapters. I think I honestly really like the roller skating scene, which was similar to that, which was where Alex, I think, kind of had her aha moment about Molly. You know, some good scenes, some laughable moments. They like, you know, try limbo and doesn't go so well for Alex, who has never roller skated before. But yeah, definitely that one.
That's a good one.
Yeah, those moments in romance books where they're clueless, but you see it coming and you're just waiting, and then the payoff is there, and it's so satisfying.
Uh-oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I was going to say, Tucker, do you have a specific scene in mind that was your favorite?
I'm not sure I do have a favorite scene in mind. I know that for me, writing a lot of the scenes, especially the more kind of difficult scenes that center on loss and sorrow, were in a strange and surprising way kind of, I don't want to say therapeutic or cathartic, but it just felt really important for me to walk through some of that stuff 30 years on. I think that I've spent a lot of time over the past 2 or 3 decades trying to keep a lot of that stuff in a box and to sort of outrun it, some of the emotions from that time in my life. And you can't do that, it doesn't work. But I tried to make it work for a long time. So when I was writing some of the scenes that felt very personal to me, because they were very familiar to me, it fed me back in a way that was unexpected, and that I'm really grateful for having the opportunity to do that. So it sounds weird to say that the sad scenes are kind of my favorite ones, but they're the ones that are the most important to me.
Yeah, and you know, that makes sense because they're some of the most pivotal moments in the book, and they really hit the heart of what I think you were trying to say. And I could tell it was a really personal book for you. It's like every line is, especially everything about New York, is very much like, okay, this person lived this. And I really love that. How about you, Andrew?
In a complete and utter tonal 180. The scene that was probably the most fun for me to write, I don't remember if it's halfway through the book, but it's definitely the turning point of it, where the main character realizes that he has been betrayed and is in the point in his infection where he has no more impulse control. And he's just like, oh, I'm going to kill this boy. And it's you know, it's also at the part of the infection where his face is starting to rot off, like his skin is coming off. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna find this boy in this post-apocalyptic town and I am going to kill him. And not only was it so incredibly cathartic to write a trans boy just going completely unhinged, right? Just being like, yep, I have, my teeth are falling out and fangs are coming in their place. My tongue is 3 feet long. I don't have half my face anymore. Yeah, it's fine. I'm totally fine. My friends will be there for me when I come back, and nothing bad is going to happen because of this terrible thing I'm going to do. But the way that it's written, I had a lot of fun with that scene because the narrator's voice is based on the cadence of evangelical preachers, right? So if you've watched any televangelist sermons, kind of the frothing fervor they get worked up into. And the narration is based specifically on that cadence throughout the whole book, but especially in that chapter where the main character is just rabid. And it was so much fun. It was the most stress relieving thing I had ever done. It was just kind of like, all right, yeah, especially now with all of the anti-trans bills that have been coming around. I was like, this is all of my anger at that situation crammed into one horrific chapter. It was just so much fun. I loved writing it. I loved getting away with writing it. I still can't believe I got away with some of the stuff in that book. But it was just so much fun. I had a blast.
Yeah, the queer rage that was emanating from the pages during that was just amazing. I mean, there's a meme about June is Queer Pride Month and July is Queer Wrath Month, and this book is just like both crammed into one, and I loved it. I loved it. So that's about all the time we have. Thank you guys so much. This was great. It was so great to meet you. And I hope the audience enjoyed meeting our authors. I really think everybody should get all of these books and just read them back to back because they're such a diverse list, but the themes throughout really resonate together. And so just a reminder that you can get those books at oblongbooks.com or in store in the Rhinebeck or Millerton location. And everybody just have a great night, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank
you
you
for having us. Yeah.
Thank
It was
you.
great to meet you all.
This was so fun. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.